Hello. Thank you for, can you guys hear me? Yeah, awesome. First, I'd like to. Okay. First, I'd like to thank the panel we had before this on our friends from media. Now we have another exciting lineup of speakers with us. But before I get into them, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Shubh, and I'm a second year in the college, double majoring in economics and computer science. And I'm extremely passionate about AI, free market policy, and geopolitics. As an international student studying here on a full scholarship, I'm incredibly grateful for all the opportunities that the United States and the University of Chicago gives to the best and brightest minds, if I may, from around the world to come here and pursue their talents to give back to society. And so being a part of the Chicago Thinker has been a great part and, more importantly, a great mission to contribute to. Our next panel will be about American citizenship and the character and the changing character of American education. And it will be moderated by our own Tyler Chasteen. Tyler is a third year at the University of Chicago, where he is majoring in law, letters and society, and economics. He is also the managing editor of the Chicago Thinker. He is from Southern Illinois and serves as the 5th Ward Committeeman of the Chicago Republican Party. Our panel today consists of 4 leading voices in fields ranging American academia, academic administration, and law. First, we have with us Professor Dorian Abbot, who serves as a professor of geophysics at the University of Chicago. He is joined by his daughter, Emma, who is 3 years old. He is widely known for his advocacy on pro-merit hiring processes in academia and cultivating free speech environments in our great universities. And as someone who studied physics from him, I can say it's a true privilege to have gotten to know him both inside the classroom and outside. Thank you for joining us here. Next, we have Paul Vallas. Paul Vallas served as the CEO of the Chicago public school system. He is a member of the Democratic Party and most recently the runner-up in the 2023 mayoral election in Chicago, where he came second only to the mayor in a runoff election. He has worked extensively around the world and in Chicago to develop education systems. Next, we have Robert Bortins, who is the CEO of Classical Conversations, now the world's largest classical homeschooling organizations. Robert is a member of the board of directors of Homeschool Now USA and the C12 Group. He also hosts the show Refining Rhetoric, where he talks about business, politics, faith, and education. We also have with us Jonathan Heiderscheidt, a leading Chicago criminal and immigration attorney with over 10 years of experience working with clients and institutions. I will now hand it over to our panel to take it from here. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for being here. Thanks for coming back after the break, and for those of you that's your first event of the day, thank you for being here. We're super excited to have you. It's great to see some familiar faces in the audience. This is a great panel. I'm really excited to talk about it. Obviously, education is a cornerstone of our national identity. It shapes how young Americans understand their roles and responsibilities. And I'm hoping to explore today that the evolving curricula, policy decisions, and cultural influences that are redefining the preparation of the next generation to engage in civic life. In a time of shifting values, we'll examine challenges and opportunities in fostering a unified sense of citizenship that upholds principles like liberty, self-reliance, and the rule of law. Obviously, we have a diverse panel here, as you just heard introduced, and we're going to hear some diverse perspectives. And so let's begin. We're going to open with a question I'd like you all to address, and that's that education has long been a vehicle for instilling values. There's no such thing as an education system that doesn't instill values, a valueless education system. That is something that doesn't exist. These values can be civic responsibility, national unity, moral values. How are today's educational systems, K through 12, higher ed, and beyond, shaping students' understanding of American citizenship? And are they effectively preparing the next generation to uphold shared values? We can start with you, Paul.
Well, it really depends on the school district. It really depends on the state. I think from my own perspective, I think the Chicago Public Schools have gone off the rail. I mean, the union really since 2010, when the national teacher unions saw that they were losing ground to the charter school movement and to the school choice movement in successive administrations, the Clinton administration, the Bush administration, the Obama administration with Race to the Top. They realized that they needed allies, and they began to really establish alliances, political alliances with the progressive left. If you look at many of the anti-police groups, et cetera, many groups that are out there, they're all heavily funded by the Chicago Teachers Union. So the union itself has really become, or the major unions in cities like New York and LA and others, they've really become political parties in their own right. And they've really, in many ways, worked to indoctrinate the children. You know, I don't see anything that creates certain common, or that promotes common values in the Chicago Public Schools. I see a curriculum, and I see extracurricular activities that are divisive. And of course, I personally had the experience of basically the union taking students to register to vote, and then taking them to the polls. So whether or not the issues, and I'm not taking a position on any of these issues, whether it was Israel, Gaza, or any of the initiatives that are going on right now, you've seen the politicization of the schools, and the teachers' unions have really seen the schools as not only a source of members, which means a source of income, which means a source of political clout, but because of their associations with many of these other groups as part of building a coalition so that they could protect their interests. I think the schools have become very political, and in many respects, I think they're indoctrinating the young people.
Well, thank you very much for that. That's really insightful. I'm probably the least capable of answering that question on this panel because I don't spend too much time in the education systems anymore. And I remember my attitude when I left law school was no more pencils, no more books. So I haven't, I'm not quite an established expert in the way that my co-panelists are in the education sphere, but I will speak a little bit from my experience as a CPS parent. I have two kids in Chicago public schools, and I do see in the Chicago public school system a symptom that I think is playing out more broadly, and that's sort of growing inequality, where we have two-tier systems, one for neighborhoods and people who are doing really well, and one for neighborhoods and people that aren't doing so well. And my hope as a CPS parent is that we'll find a way that not just the people working within the school system, but the different segments of the community will come together and find a way to improve what is delivered to the student. I'm very fortunate the school system and the school that our kids are in is great, and they learn a lot, and the teachers there are awesome. But unfortunately, not every kid gets that experience in Chicago today. And so I'm interested to hear from my other panelists about how we fix that or how we change that. But I think that we need to agree on what is the common set of values that we want to see in the school system or not. And I don't have all the answers for that. That really should be a community discussion. But I think we need to get back to basic principles and first steps in education and really redirect the focus on the kids where it needs to be, because the kids are our future.
No, I appreciate this question, and I'm going to try to move the Overton box with Overton window with my conversation. And it's interesting that this follows up the First Amendment speech, because education is really being coerced by the state in our country. And in Chicago, I think is one of the cities that has the most successful public school system, because it costs a lot of money and your kids can't read or do math, and you have really high taxes, and government is tyrannical and overbearing over your lives. And that was the fundamental desire of the public school founders in America. It was actually imported from Prussia. And if the public school system's done its job, you probably have no idea where Prussia is, but it's part of Germany, or was part of Germany, and pre-World War I. And they also got the public school system from Russia. And so basically, the public school system that set up the atmosphere for the First and Second World War was imported here into the United States. And it's not surprising to me that our country has basically been at war ever since that point. And of course, I'm not a pacifist, but I believe that for us to get back to the fundamental values of our country, we have to decide, do the citizens school its government, or does the government school its citizens? And if we want a government that's $36 trillion in debt, that will step on our public free speech rights, who will assassinate citizens overseas, we should continue doing what we've been doing for the last 200 years. Now in 1812, an Italian minister came over and noticed that every single American could read, they could do basic math, and this was before the government school system was founded. And now that the government school experiment, and it is an experiment and it is a failed experiment, has been on our country for 200 years, we have the highest tax rates in the country, some of the highest tax rates in the world, the highest tax rates we've ever seen, and some of the lowest literacy and math rates. And so I think those things are not surprising when you look at the actual purpose of public education, which is to bring more power to the system itself, which obviously takes power away from the individual. And so children are given to parents, and so parents are the primary responsibility for educating children. And any system that undermines parents, and obviously the current system is doing that, is doomed to fail no matter how much money you throw at it. And so for a case, for improving the current system, you would need to design it around serving parents instead of serving the students and serving the teachers' unions.
So sorry about my daughter.
She's cute.
I try to help my wife on weekends, and she's with the baby right now. And anyways, I wanted to come and participate in this event because I think it's important. The students are putting it on. Anyways, I'll just say briefly, I think what I see lacking in education is virtue. And so the classical virtues, I don't know if you covered that.
No, you go for it.
But the classical virtues and the religious virtues, so, justice, discipline, these kinds of things, but also love and mercy. I just don't think that we're forming students well to be adults who participate as citizens of a republic. And so that's something that I would want to see improved.
Yeah. Did you want to respond?
Yeah, these are just, I'm someone who's driven by statistics. And we have a school system, what you're seeing nationally is a systematic abandonment of standards. There's been a restoration of social promotion, which is the soft bigotry of low expectations. You've seen it because I remember in 1995, we ended social promotion. We started mandating after-school programs, summer school programs. Incidentally, enrollment grew 40,000, test scores rose. We negotiated consecutive teacher union contracts with no divisiveness, if anyone who remembers that phase. But you see it systematically, and it's actually infiltrated even the elite universities. SAT came out with a study talking about the abandonment of standards. And I think what's happened in the K-12 systems is it's been 50 years since the U.S. Department of Education was created. And my deputy chief of staff was Secretary of Education, Arnie Duncan. And at the end of the day, what has it shown? Inequities have never been greater. There's been no closing the achievement gap. The test scores have never been lower. The other day, I was talking to some educators from Canada, and I said, I know why Trump wants to annex Canada. He wants to raise the test scores because Canadian schools are ranked 6th internationally. Our schools are ranked 38th. And what COVID did was it really showed how ineffective the schools are. Not only because the unions hamstring schools' abilities to do the innovation that's needed to close the achievement gap, like increasing instructional time on task, probably the most important factor in closing the achievement gap, but also because the bureaucracies maintain themselves. In Chicago, only 56% of the $10 billion that go to the Chicago public schools find its way into the classroom. They have 22,000 non-teaching employees. They have 8,000 central office, regional office, system-wide employees. So what the unions have done is they want to erase the test scores. That's why they want to get rid of the magnet schools. They don't want competition. That's why they want to eliminate the public not-for-profit charter schools. They don't want competition. That's why they do not want to be ranking schools based on academic performance, because testing is racist. So at the end of the day, you're seeing this destructive approach where they're abandoning standards, they're keeping schools. On the west side of Chicago, there is this Hope Academy founded by this a Catholic layman who raises the money to provide 300 kids with scholarships. Hope Academy, they have a 400 student waiting list, overwhelmingly Latino and Black. And 8 blocks away is Manly High School, which I renovated for 1,200 enrollment. It has 76 kids and 27 staff. I mean, that is not a functioning school system. So that's the challenge. I mean, the challenge is we've got to repair the damage that's being done to the school system. And I don't want to consume too much of the airtime here, but this is a system that is consuming 56% of all of our property taxes, on top of $1 billion that the city council, and through their special levies, gives the schools, in addition to that money, for an education project that has, in effect, black students reading barely above barely into the double digits, and computing in the single digits. What you have in systems like Chicago is, I call it education apartheid. Because if you are low income, you come from a low income family in Chicago or New York or LA, in any of these cities, and the overwhelming vast majority of children who are in that economic demographic are Black and Latino, you are relegated to a failing school. You have no alternative to that failing school. And they're even trying to get rid of the magnet schools. Why? Because the magnet schools offer an embarrassing contrast in performance. So that's the struggle. That's the struggle. With the amount of money, and in the suburbs, they spend 60, 70% of their property taxes on education. And this is the work product that we're getting. This is not about politics. This is about raising standards, holding people accountable, and making sure that, as you've pointed out, they're providing the type of holistic educational experience so that it just goes beyond just the basics. Character education, values, community service, etc. That needs to be a part of it. But unfortunately, that's not the pathway that these schools are following these days.
So I think we need to understand that when public school was first started, it was paid for by the people who actually attended that school, and the people who couldn't afford to do it were subsidized by business people, by the church, by local community groups. And as the school system was more centralized, from community-based schools to then state-based schools and then federal-based schools, the lie that was sold was that by using scale, we're going to save you money, we're going to set more standards, we're going to have the smartest people setting the best standards, getting you the best curriculum, and by centralizing all these decision-making processes, that we're going to get the best outcomes possible. And what we've seen now is over 50% of your state taxes and about 10% of your federal taxes are going to a school system that is completely incompetent as far as educating our people. And so for me, the solution is you first have to end the Department of Education on the federal level, but then you need to end the Department of Education on the state level and let every single individual municipality, county, city control their school systems. And yes, you're going to get terrible school systems inside of your state, but at least it's not your entire state system that is crumbling between your eyes. And it's much easier to move 100 miles down the road in your own state than it is to cross state lines into other municipalities. And so it's inherent in the system that we're taking responsibility and decision making away from parents who love their children the best, telling them that we need to send them to experts who, my wife's taught in the public school system for 10 years. She's taught in Title I school. Over 50% of kids were on school lunch. She saw, 300 kids per day. There's a documentary called Waiting on Superman. In management and business management, you have one manager for 7 employees. And those 7 employees are supposedly paid to be there and trained. Can you imagine how 30 kids in one classroom and seeing 5 to 6 of those a day? It's just impossible, no matter how wonderful our teacher colleges is and how much those teachers are trying to love their kids. It's just emotionally impossible for one teacher to love 300 kids equally on a day-to-day basis. So the system itself needs to be reimagined, and we should stop trying to rearrange deck chairs on the Titanic. Yes, we need to have a balm for those who are currently stuck in the system, but as long as we are stuck in bureaucracy trying to make minimal changes here and there instead of saying this entire system, a 200-year experiment that has destroyed our country, we need to look at real solutions, not window dressing.
Yeah, Paul, you brought up COVID, and I think that's something that's totally changes how we view this conversation. Chris had a very powerful story about what his experience was in the last panel, going through COVID-19 as a school, someone in school in California. I was in Illinois. I'm from downstate Illinois. I was a sophomore in high school. We went away for spring break, and that was the last time we saw a school, the inside of a school building, until I guess the start of my junior year. We were going 2 days a week for half days. And then by the second quarter, we were going 4 days a week for half days. I didn't return to a full education until my senior year. And even that full education, we had to walk in the hallways. There were arrows on the which ways to walk, and you had to wear masks. You didn't really get to enjoy lunch with your friends because you could be spaced out. And that continued until February, when a judge in Illinois put a quash on those mandates. So it was greatly impactful on much of my education. Interestingly, too, on my sophomore year, when we went away in March, so we didn't have a full quarter of instruction, they tried to do something online, but the problem was that the governor mandated that you couldn't require people to have grades on their things because you have maybe different distributions of people with access to the internet. And so that led to a lot of students just not engaging with teachers, and because there was no consequence.
Well, COVID was highway robbery, and for the unions, the schools got $200 billion. In Chicago, it was equivalent to $8,600 per student. The spike in crime that you saw post-COVID 2019 could almost be exclusively linked to the spike in youth crime. There was a 50% increase in murders among school-age youth, 17 years and younger. 8% of those being arrested for murder, for 9% for shootings, almost 50% for carjacking, school-age youth, 17 years and younger, out of school. Now, everybody's bragging because the crime rate is driving. Johnson's saying, my reforms are bringing the murder rate down. It's plummeting nationwide. In fact, in New Orleans, where I rebuilt the schools after Katrina, the murder rate has declined 40%. And per capita, that was the most violent city in America. So the bottom, and why is that happening? Because the economy is reopened, so to speak. Illinois lagged behind everybody else in reopening the economy, and certainly reopening schools. They kept Chicago public schools closed 78 straight weeks. 38,000 kids left the system. How many are on the street? How many are committing crimes? And with devastating consequences. Yet during that same period of time, they hired 9,000 more people. And the majority of them were not teachers. Something's wrong with it. The math isn't working there. The schools should have been the sanctuary. My approach to education has always been you keep the schools open until 8 o'clock at night, on the weekends, over the summer. Give children a safe place to go until it's time for them to go to bed. And whatever they need, you provide them with. But 78 weeks, the schools could have been an ark, but they weren't. The ark was closed to everybody but the student. I mean, everyone got on the ark except the students and their families. And the devastating impact that it had on working families, because only 1 in 6 Black and Latino families, low-income families, could work remotely. So they were stuck. They were stuck. They couldn't go out there and work. They weren't involved in the type of jobs where they could work remotely. So we were not only punishing the children, but punishing working families. The fact that a Randy Weingarten can run around and claim that they really fought to get schools reopened just makes my blood boil. Because this was the opportunity when the schools, who consume more than 50% of our dollars, should have stepped up to the plate. And they didn't. And we're going to be suffering from these consequences. The interesting thing is the Catholic schools, which reopened after that summer, the summer following COVID, and I did all sorts of workshops on how to reopen schools safely and et cetera, et cetera. So I was not, I was concerned about the impact on COVID, having gotten COVID early on a couple times and getting vaccinated along with my first responder sons. But the bottom line is the damage that was done, the long-term damage that was done because the schools, driven by the unions, the national teacher unions, basically took the money and ran and did not do what they were supposed to do. That created the exodus. And the interesting thing is the Catholic schools nationally, which reopened, when you look at the same demographic, by demographic, there was no loss in academic performance. In fact, the Catholic schools, if they were a state, they would be the top performing schools, the state academically nationally. Charter schools, which also reopened, except in Chicago, where they blocked the charter schools from reopening after that summer, also outperformed the traditional public schools. So people just have to realize how their tax dollars are being spent. The damage that was done to a generation of children, and the fundamental question is, are we going to give them the ability to cause more damage? Because they just negotiated the second $1.5 billion contract for the Chicago Teachers Union. They did not add a minute to the school day or a day to the school year. And increased instructional time on task is the number one way and the most effective way at closing the achievement gap, and not an additional work responsibility in return for a $1.5 billion contract. So those are the issues that we're facing, pure and simple.
Yeah, and you brought up Randy Weingarten. She's a big teacher union boss who actually, just the other day I saw on the news, was taking credit for encouraging Florida to reopen their schools early, which is wildly inaccurate if you know history or actually just watched the news a couple years ago. So, but Dorian, I was curious about your thoughts on higher ed. And
I have a couple questions for Paul. I mean,
Yeah.
The first is, I mean, the last mayoral election, you were running against a teachers union guy, and your arguments, very common sense and reasonable, didn't win. And so I'm sort of like, why are the taxpayers electing someone who's going to fleece them? That's my first question.
Yeah.
And then the second question is a little bit more like, okay, so you've made a very strong case of all the problems, but what are your solutions? Like, just stop having a teachers union, or?
Oh, no, not at all.
So yeah, so those are the two questions.
Yeah, very good. Well, so and I'm well publicized, as you know, and of course the union was very good at looking at every interview I ever did as part of that campaign. But I've written extensively in the, I'm a regular contributor to the Chicago Tribune. I write for Illinois Policy. I'm the Democrat among their network. I also write for the Chicago Contrarian, as well as other publications. And I've written at length about what went wrong and the way to approach it. So let me tell you what I would do. And this is what I did in New Orleans after Katrina, when I was tasked and invited by Democrats to go to New Orleans and to rebuild the schools. I was not going to rebuild the old corrupt school system in which people were indicted and the FBI had to set up an office in the central office. They had to provide protection to the old superintendent. I instead decided to create a different system. And in that system, I dismantled, for the most part, the central office, using the central office to deal with some of the macro financial issues like pensions and facilities, and then accountability, but nothing else, to push the money down to the local schools so that not 60% were getting to the local schools, but 80 and 90% were getting to the local schools. That was the first thing. The second thing I did was to make compensation an issue to negotiate, but not the workload, the work responsibility, the job responsibility. The idea was to give schools the capacity to innovate. Test scores in New Orleans rose for 7 straight years, the second worst performing school district in the country, in the state, led the state in academic improvement by 22 points. It wasn't because of magic, because every school was an independent, autonomous LEA. And that meant they controlled their budget and they controlled their resources. But you know why they improved? Because they decided to lengthen the school day and lengthen the school year, because the kids in New Orleans were getting 34% more instructional time than was mandated by law. Not because of my genius, but because of their recognition that the kids needed more instructional time attached. So what I would do in the Chicago Public Schools is, first of all, I would radically decentralize the district to push the money down to the local school level, number one. Number two, I would empower the elected local school councils to make decisions with their principals about their budgets, how to allocate the resources, the length of the school day, the length of the school year, whether to, whether to keep their schools open on Saturday, give them the flexibility, and even give them the flexibility to pick a better school model if that local model was failing. Indianapolis, Google it, it's the Renaissance schools and the innovation schools are these public schools where the communities can pick better school models if the schools are failing. And then the third thing that I would do is really give parents choice. If you're in a failing school, you should have the right to enroll your kid in a magnet school or a public charter school, or for that matter, there's no reason why you shouldn't get support to attend a parochial private school. The state of Illinois is the only state in the country to get rid of its tiny, itty-bitty, state-funded private school scholarship program for poor kids. That doesn't cost the Chicago Public Schools a dime. So what would I do? Those are the things that I would do. Radically decentralize so the money gets down to the local schools. Empower the elected local school councils and their principals to make decisions regarding instruction, regarding curriculum instructional models, regarding the length of the school day, instructional time on task, and really give parents quality school choice. And I think those three things can be done within the financial confines that the district has, and I believe that the schools would get better.
So you answered the second one, but not the first one. And one thing I noticed was the sort of people out on the street campaigning for Johnston, they tended to be sort of like single progressive types who were sold on the progressive thing, but didn't have children and paying property taxes and things. And so I'm sort of wondering, why were they so, is the whole like unserious, wild, progressive stuff, is that a sort of sleight of hand that can be used to grab goodies in the union? And how do you respond to that in a big city with a lower fertility rate and increasing number of singles who aren't forming families and marriages and buying property and these sorts of things?
You're right on top. You're right. How do you convince people? First of all, the voter turnout was notoriously low. Even in wards where I did well, for example, the voter turnout was abysmal. The 19th Ward or Napolitano's Ward. I mean, it's just people simply don't participate. And I think the unions did a much better job defining me. I mean, I'm a guy who supported marriage equality 12 years before, when they called it gay marriage, 12 years before Barack Obama did, when I ran against Rod Blagojevich, and also lost by 1.5 percentage points. My MBEWB, my hiring of black principals and promotion of black educators, my opening of 78 school buildings, 90% of them in black and Latino communities, or for that matter, my work in Haiti, where I chaired that well-known right-wing conservative Sean Penn's not-for-profit down there, where we took care of 50,000 displaced Haitians. It didn't matter. I was defined as some far-right MAGA Republican, and it hit and hit and hit. And in these days, we operate in these like echo chambers, where people don't venture. Some watch Fox News, some watch Rachel Maddow, and we don't venture out of those echo chambers. And you would think that with this communications revolution, people would search for the facts, and they don't, unfortunately. And I think the union just did a better job getting organized. But I'll tell you, in this last local school election, because I'm not done yet, I'm not planning on running again, but I've been working to help people get organized so that we can present legitimate challenges for these elections. We challenged 9 of the 10 teacher union candidates for the elected school board, and they only won 3 of those 9 seats. So there is hope out there. I think there is an awakening. But my election, I think, was too close to the George Floyd tragedy and the things that had happened. I think if the election had occurred last year, things would have been a lot different. But look, this is why I come to forums like this. You just have to keep on fighting and fighting and fighting. But I believe that education is the civil rights issue of our generation. I believe that there is unfinished business of Brown versus the Board of Education, and we've got to realize that we are denying children civil rights when they are stuck on a school on the south and west side that's failing, like at Manly, and they can't go. And they can't go walk 6 blocks away and go to the Hope School that not only won the basketball championship, but is among the top 10 or top 15 private high schools in terms of academic performance in the city. Why can't they have the opportunity to do that?
So to paraphrase what you just said, the teachers' unions are the major obstacle to civil rights in modern America. It sounds like that's what you're saying.
I think the present leadership is. I've negotiated 26 collective bargaining agreements. I negotiated collective bargaining agreements, 3 with the teachers' union under the late, great Tom Reese. I'm old enough to remember Albert Shanker when he came to Chicago to talk to us about how to do charter schools, because it was an American Federation of Teachers model. The idea was to have these charter schools where teachers would have the autonomy to make decisions in those local schools and not have to be dictated by the central administration and things like that. And of course, 2 contracts in Philadelphia and even in Bridgeport, Connecticut, where the teachers union president didn't like me. So it's not the teachers union. I think it's the present leadership, and it's the radicalization of that leadership. Even in New Orleans, which is a right-to-work state, I sat down with the teachers union president, who was a big supporter of mine, to, in effect, facilitate the hiring of all the teachers who had left New Orleans after Katrina. Any teacher who wanted to return, I hired back, as long as they passed the minimum test scores, which incidentally were 5th grade. We're 5th grade level test scores, if you can believe it. But at the end of the day, unions, it's the present leadership. It's the corrupting of the unions. And I think it's been guilt by association. Their desire to broaden their base has contributed to the radicalization. As my mother used to say, who you hang around with, you become more like. And I think there's been this cross-pollination to the detriment of the children.
So we've talked quite a bit about opening up the education system, right? Like open it up to the private school systems, charter school systems. I wanted to come to you, Robert, and the classical education that you promote that emphasizes logic, rhetoric, and moral values and moral formation. How can this model that you promote, equip students to navigate modern civic challenges, and what do you see as the benefits of this system, especially in a society with competing values and obviously digital distractions?
Yeah, I think classical education really goes to the root of how children learn. And the model that we have puts students, typically 8 to 12, in a classroom once a week with a trained parent tutor, and then they're going back home and doing the homeschooling themselves. And typical homeschool students probably spending 2 or 3 hours a day in formal education, and the rest of the time they're spending it learning life, modeling life after an adult who loves them and wants to take care of them. And so some of the stuff that my panelist is talking about is really, to quote Monty Python, violence inherent into the system, where systems are always going to, as I said earlier, bring power to themselves. And so we need to have a conversation around who is responsible for children. And that responsibility, I believe, by nature and nature's God, is the parents. And so when I hear things about having the schools open 24/7 and feeding kids, that is inherently a worldview that says the government, the civil government, is responsible for children. And I thoroughly reject that. So we need to put together systems in place that believe parents are fully responsible for children, and at best civil government is there to be out of their way. And so there's plenty of money around there. I mean, imagine if you got 50% of your taxes back and the system shut down tomorrow. Well, we would be able to build new systems that were actually accountable to parents. So a classical education follows the brain development of a child, and it also goes and reads those good books, the best that human kind has offered over the last 3,000 years, and reads the original source text. So we'll go back and read, what was George Washington writing other founders? What did Plato think? Our students are translating Iliad from Latin, and they start Latin in kindergarten. And so, the Catholic schools, if they were a state, they would be actually the number 2 performing school system, and classical conversations would be number 1 because our academic scores are so much higher. And it's because we take people from all socioeconomic developments. We take people who don't even have a high school diploma and help them be the parent to their children. And parenting has been beaten out of us because for 200 years we've allowed the civil government to step on our individual rights. And so it's not surprising that we see the results that we have, because the fundamental goal of the public school system was to break those parental-children bond and have the children bond with the state so that Marxism could be established in the United States. And so if you're pursuing truth, beauty, and goodness, which is what the pursuit of classical education is all about, you see that Marxism has killed more people in the world than any other form of religion, and it is a form of religion. I mean, just look at how committed its followers are. Boys and girls can't even look down and see what gender they are anymore, and that's what happens when we reject a biblical worldview. And so ultimately, we need to have systems that revolve around parental empowerment. I'm not for school choice because all I see is the government getting involved in parental decisions again. Where the funding matters. It's tyrannical to tax someone to fund ideas that they're opposed to, which is why I had some disagreements with Senk on the previous panel. And so we fundamentally need to reconsider, modern education should be thrown in the trash tomorrow. We can't do it soon enough, and we've got to go back to what worked for 2,000 years.
Yeah, I'd like to, so we've been thinking about these value systems, these systems of education that inherently instill values in our children. I wanted to go to the side of how can we, obviously our system is not also just set up for Americans. We're also a country of that's has a growing immigrant population that's working to, kind of mix and find a way to balance this, to integrate these systems. So I want to come to John. John, as an immigration lawyer here in Chicago, you guide individuals through this legal process, and also I'm sure work through the cultural journey of becoming an American. What unique perspectives do you think immigrants bring to the concept of citizenship, and how can we better integrate both native-born and naturalized citizens into our civic systems, such as the education system, but there are many more that exist as well?
I knew we would get to an immigration question. The first thing I want to say is I want to thank all of the other panelists who are experts in education, because they illuminate some really different viewpoints, but discussions that need to be had. And I want to thank the people who put on the summit, the Chicago Thinker and everybody, because without free speech, we can't have these discussions. And it's very important. And the reason I start with that is I don't know that I'm going to add anything unique, but when we go back to first principles in this country, I think I take them from the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights, and of course the Constitution. But the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights speak more to liberties, to your liberties here, to our liberties on this panel and everybody in the city. And the Constitution speaks more to the powers of the government. So when I think about what does it mean to be American, which America's only been around 300 years, not even. This globe has been around 6,000, more. I don't want to start any debates, but it's been a while. It's been longer than America. And, so what were they marching for back when America was first founded? Why were they walking through the snow in bare feet, with their feet wrapped in cloths and muskets and bayonets, and fighting against what then was the greatest military power in the world? Well, I couldn't say what I wanted to. I could be brought in and charged by anybody on hearsay or other grounds. I worshipped the king, whether the king or queen worshipped me. And that environment and a lot of other things, if I was accused of a crime and I didn't want to admit it, come on down to the Star Chamber and we'll get it out of you one way or the other. Nobody liked that. And that was going on all across Europe. And so people got in wooden boats and sailed an enormous ocean that sunk the Titanic 200 years later to get away from it. And to me, the idea is, what are our core principles and beliefs, not where do you come from? Because anybody, no matter where you're born in the globe, if you're born in Marxist Russia and you want to get out, and you want to go learn beauty, truth, and goodness somewhere, but they don't offer that there. Those first principles are so important, and I think to me what it means to be a citizen is not so much what are your immutable characteristics, or did you come here on the Mayflower or 5 weeks ago, but, and this is asked in naturalization interviews. You could attend one if you wanted to, if the government would let you do that. I doubt they would, but you can go there and they ask you, do you support this country? Do you support the principles that we live by? And to me, it's not so much where you're from or your immutable characteristics, but are you willing to swear by the principles that have gotten us this far? And if we go back to this topic that I've learned so much about from all the different panelists earlier, they probably have more answers than me in that area. But the one thing I think that is antithetical to America is socialism and communism and Marxism. And there's too much of that thinking at top brass levels of different entities across this country, whether it's the education system, whether it's big conglomerate corporations, whoever it may be. And we have to get back to the idea that I'm in charge of me. I'm responsible for me. And I don't share every one of your opinions, but the one I do share with you wholly is that the children are the first responsibility of their parents. It is not for the government to come in and tell me how to raise a kid that I take care of, that I pay for, that I love, that I created by the love of me and my wife. Nobody will ever do that. It's totally inappropriate. And I'm so grateful that people are choosing to speak up about that particular thing. I come from a family of union teachers, so I don't think CTU is the worst thing in the world. In fact, I think labor unions and the struggles for labor rights in the 50s and 40s led to the explosion of the middle class, and that's a really important thing. Can they be abused? Yes. Have they been used for wacky policies recently? Certainly, in my opinion. But they do bring some value too. And where I think where we can do ourselves such a great service is not worrying about, are you a citizen or are you not? Are you white, are you black, are you gay, are you straight? Let's worry about, we're all people. And how do we fix this place for people? And how do we move forward for people? And how do we respect the first ideals of this country, which is to let you choose what's right for your family, and to let you choose what's right for your family, and to let you choose what's right for your family, rather than having the king or queen come in and tell me what time I'll have tea.
I wanted to say something on the migrant issue because I've actually done a number of op-eds on it, even before it escalated into the crisis that it is today. This country has benefited from the periodic waves of migrants, Greek American immigrants. We were in the restaurant business. The Latino immigrants who worked for us in the restaurant business, all their kids are firefighters, lawyers, doctors, etc. It's just the most amazing thing. So I believe that unlike other countries where the population is aging and they don't have the type of immigration policies that we've had in the past, we have benefited, and we've benefited significantly. And so every wave of immigrants brings a new energy. It brings a new energy, but clearly, a country is obligated to protect its borders and to secure its borders. But I think we also have to take a more nuanced approach about the immigrants who are already here and working and are within the borders. When I was asked what I would have done as mayor, first of all, I would have told Abbott or anybody else who is putting people on buses and sending them up to Chicago that they would have to coordinate any transportation, because anybody who came unauthorized, I would just boot the buses and send them to the auto pound, and the great invasion from Florida and Texas would have ended overnight. So at the end of the day,
I'd go one farther on that.
Yeah.
I would have had anybody, because what happened with Texas in particular was alien smuggling, and you talk about, you could say it was right or wrong, but under the letter of the law, it was alien smuggling, and it was done by the governor of Texas, and it was done by some other governors too. And what would have stopped that really quickly is if they said, you know what, we're not just going to put boots on the bus and arrest the driver. Anybody who gets off the bus, we're going to have an ICE agent waiting for them to get off the bus and make sure that they're supposed to be here and what their status is. And I guarantee you, you would not have had more than a second bus come up here. And that may sound cruel, but you also have to think about the American taxpayer, the Chicago taxpayer, the county taxpayer, and the state taxpayer in a state that is the highest taxed in the nation, save maybe one or two, however you compare the books. So, those are really important things, but it fuels into why did that happen? Well, they needed more kids to replace the kids who left the school system.
Absolutely. But also, look, I think this whole approach, I also said that, you can't talk about how tough you are, you're a sanctuary city, you're a sanctuary state, and we're not going to cooperate with ICE when it comes to getting criminals off the street. But then when they talk about having people who are working or people trying to set up their own little fruit stands or all small businesses, we can't do anything. They haven't been approved by the federal government yet. So on the one hand, we're really tough when it comes to not cooperating with the federal government on getting criminals off the street, but we're handcuffed when it comes to basically telling the federal government we want to give temporary work permits or licenses to people who want to work, who want to do business. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. It was interesting when Holman came to town, and remember, he had this similar job during the Obama administration, the exporter-in-chief president. And when he came to town, he basically said, look, you can either, if you don't cooperate with us on getting the criminals off the street, and we have to come in, we have to do it on our own, we're going to cast a wide net. And if there are illegal people who are here illegally who are not criminals, it doesn't matter. They're here illegally. They're going to be deported. So he was basically saying, work with us on getting the criminals off the street. Cooperate with us. So I would have said, yes, I'm going to cooperate on getting the criminals off the street, on getting those individuals and getting people registered. But when it comes to people who are here, I'm going to use my home rule authority as mayor to give people work permits or to give people temporary licenses as they await their immigration approval, as they are facilitated through the process. But this is not what's happened. It's all political, because right now what they're trying to do is they're trying to scare the hell out of people in the schools, claiming that ICE agents are going to come to your schools and they're going to pull people out of the schools. We had three, as a superintendent, I went through three great migrations. There was the war in the Balkans, when we had a huge influx of Bosnians who came here and things like that. They were processed. ICE agents were never given access to the schools. We never released confidential information. We didn't need to pass an ordinance or a law to do that. We just didn't do it. And no one knocked on our door and demanded that they have entrance. And it was the same thing in Philadelphia when you had the disaster in Haiti, before I went down to Haiti. And we had an influx of Haitian immigrants who came here, and we housed them, and we fed them, and we processed them, etc. So unfortunately, people have tried to politicize this to the detriment of a country that has always been a welcoming country. And I think this is all about politics, and it's not about how to deal with the issue of managing the immigration policies in ways that can help play to the country's strength rather than divide the country.
So I'll do one more question from me. I want to specifically ask to Dorian and Robert if we could have a couple people on Thinker staff get some microphones ready before we'll go to the audience in just a moment. But it's been brought up, the commitment to Western values. The commitment to Western values that is inherently important to incoming citizens, or to people, to incoming immigrants into the United States, but also in our education system. So you both, Dorian and Robert, have written about ideological conformity in education systems and the threat that poses. I wanted to ask, how do policies that prioritize ideology over quality impact students' preparation for civic involvement, being citizens in this country, and also just being stewards of benefiting society and working to be a fruitful governing body? How do those sorts of policies impact that?
Well, anyone who was on the campus last spring saw how they impact them. So we had maniacs, protesting in favor of terrorists, and they weren't doing that on their own. They were being inspired by the humanities education that they've gotten here and elsewhere. So in my opinion, humanities are the absolute center of a university. They're the most important thing. And the purpose of the humanities is to preserve and celebrate our tradition. But somehow we've gotten to the point where our humanities are denigrating, attacking, and destroying our tradition, and sort of pushing the idea that anyone opposed to anything associated with the West must be good, no matter what they're doing, no matter what the actual actions are. The goal of destroying the West is so important that any means that they take are justified. And so that leads to the sort of moral chaos that we saw and complete confusion. So I think that's what's at stake.
Yeah, I think, if we don't have core values that we're going to be aligned with, we will continue to have this kind of soft civil war that we see in the United States. And, you can look at our Constitution and our Declaration of Independence to see what those are. And if we don't defend them, we will lose our identity. And as many mistakes as we've made as a country, and we've made mistakes, we've actually have formed a more perfect union throughout time, and a bloody mess for the Civil War. I mean, millions of our young men dying to make that happen as we killed our friends and our neighbors and even our loved ones to free that. And so, yes, we make mistakes, but you learn from those mistakes, and people are inspired to do good when they see good. And when we have humanities departments and public school history departments and civil government where they say, look at all the bad stuff we've done, well, it's no surprise that people are ashamed instead of proud. And if you're proud of your heritage, if you're proud of your last name, if you're proud of what your grandfather did in World War II, that means something. Our family had one simple rule when we left the house. We didn't have 1,000 rules, we had one. You are going to leave this house today and you are going to represent the Bortins. The decisions you make, is that going to shine well on the Bortins' last name? There's only about 30 of us in the United States. We immigrated here after World War II. Or are your decisions going to reflect negatively on that? And so you have to know what's right and wrong, what's good and evil, and you have to have fundamental truth. And when you abandon fundamental truth for my truth or your truth or his truth or her truth, then you're going to have an inherent divide in society. And so America was able to prosper for so long because we had nature's law and the law of God that really was the core of Western civilization values. And so when we get away from those, we see chaos. And so ultimately, if we want to renew the American idea and survive another 250 years, which would be counter to most republics' life cycles, it's going to require us to go back to those fundamental core values and to reject, what can my country do for me and what can I do now for my country instead.
Yeah, so we will go to audience questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand. We've got mics on both sides ready to take them. So we'll start right down here.
Hey, thanks for the speech. I'm an incoming policy student, so sorry for taking some time from the other current college students. The way that speech or the way your panel ended kind of brings back to something from the first panel, talking about heritage, talking about the humanities division, talking about truth, talking about what this country teaches its youth. I think of how we teach the Civil War in this country, and speaking of heritage and being proud of what maybe your family did, maybe you fought for the North, maybe you fought for the South. Where do you see the teaching of the Civil War in the fundamental aspects of what the war was fought for, where it's pretty clear it was fought over slavery, and we have some people who say it's fought over states' rights, but where do you see where the humanities division comes into how we teach that topic in this country, which is the country that won the Civil War? Thanks.
I mean, I think unfortunately, at most modern campuses, that sort of topic is not taught very extensively. And so if the 19th century were covered, it would be more like the sorts of subjects that would be of interest to our humanities faculty would be more like transgender lesbianism in the 1820s. And so I think that sort of unseriousness is part of the problem that we're dealing with. So however you're going to engage with it, the specific issue, I mean, my personal take in Grant's memoirs, he says about the Southern soldiers, no one's ever fought so bravely and so well for such a terrible cause in the history of civilization. And I think that's sort of my take. But the bigger issue is we're not even having those debates because people are so distracted with irrelevancies.
Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate what he said earlier about not agreeing with me on certain things, and I'm fallen, I'm sinful, and I don't even agree with myself on all sorts of things. And I think to piggyback on what he said, I was reading the biography of Stonewall Jackson, and it's just very fascinating. And we're refusing to have these conversations of even Robert E. Lee, like people who had really fundamentally good things about them and fought for a fundamentally evil thing, right? And so in myself and all of us, like, I want to know if, like, there's things that I'm probably backing that are fundamentally evil. How can I root those things out? And so I think what the Western tradition, and at least classical education, is trying to do is, look, we're all flawed. We have all fallen. We're all going to get some stuff wrong and some stuff right. How can we look at individuals who impacted history, whether in a positive or negative way? Like, they probably weren't thinking that they were evil incarnate, right? They were probably had some good intentions, misaligned with truth and what the actual values are. And so a classical education is going to look at that. Clay talked about this earlier, about we actually do in our curriculum, we'll take controversial subjects and the students will flip a coin and argue one way for 5 minutes, and then we force them to switch sides and argue the other way for 5 minutes, because as fundamentally as I believe certain policies are going to do harm to people in America, there's other people who think my policies are going to do harm for America. And so we've got to be able to have that conversation and be able to not call each other racists or bigots or whatever, homophobes, when we're trying to have conversations, because that's ultimately called an ad hominem attack, and it's a logical fallacy. And as soon as you hear anyone on your side of the aisle or on the other side dive into ad hominem attacks, you should know that they've lost the argument.
Yeah, I think I think on this issue you just don't take the bait. When I ran the Chicago Public Schools, I respected local school councils. If the local school councils wanted their school to have more of an Afrocentric curriculum or a Latino-centric curriculum, then they were empowered to do that. They were, it was the whole idea of local autonomy, local control. I was very comfortable with that. My approach, and believe me, I got beat up because I tried to provide an academic answer to the whole issue of woke curriculum, and I basically said any change in the curriculum that deviates from standards and abandons standards, any change in the curriculum that deviates from the instructional time needed to have individuals master the standards, and any change in the curriculum that in effect demonizes one group that wasn't here when the offense was being impacted, or to another group so stigmatizes them that they begin to lose respect for their parents because of the circumstances that they find themselves in. I said, that is a damaging curriculum. But I had to deal with the debate that I was like trying to get rid of black history. Even though in 95, we not only required that black history be taught, but rather than simply having a month dedicated, we commonly integrated African American history into our history curriculum, our world history curriculum, and black history into our American history curriculum in a seamless way. So I think that's the way to do it. You set standards, you move forward on things like that. But it's clearly, look, we have a mayor who basically says that, and I'm a lifelong Democrat, a mayor who basically says that the Trump administration and his supporters don't like the outcome of the Civil War. And what they're trying to do with their policies is they're trying to reverse the outcome of the Civil War. I mean, how you can say that he didn't even survive is it's just offensive. But that's the level. That's the level, and they've said it over and over and over and over again. And so you know, you have to be able to respond to that and move on. So my approach has always been not to take the bait, is to make the argument and just move on and not intimidate and not be intimidated by attacks that you're going to get from people who are not going to want to debate the issue with you, but try to sensationalize. I also think that there's this tendency, because let's face it, we have this dynamic where we have the oppressed and the oppressors. You know, if you look at classic Marxism, it's always the class warfare. You know, the owners, the capital state with the proletariat. Well, that's been replaced by the oppressed and the oppressors. And the danger here is that anyone who is a supporter of Western values, Judeo-Christian values, can be categorized as oppressors. Whether it's the U.S. government or whether it's Christianity, or for that matter, whether it's the police officers, they're all part of the oppressors, and everybody else is part of the oppressor class. And that's how they're able to expand this definition of the oppressor class and include groups in the oppressor class that would, for example, the embrace of Islamic militants, for example, who would deny women their equal rights, who would certainly react aggressively and violently against the LGBT community. That's how they are able to be included in this coalition that is eventually posing a threat to really Western values and Western civilization. So I think what you've just got to stick to your guns and avoid taking the bait and just drive on. I think it's the only thing you can do.
The only thing I'll say to that, or the little bit I'll add to that, is it's very important that we continue to have the national discussion around the Civil War. It's very important that people understand that slavery was abhorrent. And it's very important that people understand that what happened to black people in the South is not okay by any measure, let alone modern times. As a non-expert, as just a layperson on this education topic, I think what I'd like to see my kids learn a little bit more on this is not so much the Civil War itself, because I think there's a lot expended on that, but the era of Reconstruction afterwards and how that led to so much inequality and disenfranchisement for the black community. And I think that at some point America is going to have to reckon with that and deliver on the promise that Reconstruction could have been had Lincoln not been assassinated.
Awesome. I think we have time for one more question, so we'll go right here.
Hi, my name's Alex. Thanks for taking my question. I had a question on your opinion about when you talk about the failures of public education and whether it's more of a national or state level kind of issue. This is more on personal experience, but I went to a public school in both LA and Dallas, and I have to say the public school in Dallas was worldly better than the one in LA. Better teacher quality, better education, better infrastructure, better football fields. And I was just wondering, where does that difference come from? Why can it be so much different in one city and another in the same country?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I'm very familiar with the Dallas system as well as LA. Dallas has not abandoned standards. They still have tough standards. They haven't embraced social promotion. They do demand greater accountability. If school districts are failing, the state will go in and will take over. Now, Texas is not a right-to-work state. They have unions, and those unions are powerful too. And they've certainly tried to attempt politically to kind of rein in charters, but clearly the state it still has its, I would say, educational values, in the right place right now. Where LA and Chicago and New York, I mean, clearly the unions, particularly the powerful teacher unions, which you don't have a powerful single union dominating the state of Texas like you have in LA, where the LA teacher unions are just a powerful, or for that matter, New York, where that's a massive union, or in Chicago. So those unions have really become political parties in their own right. And you don't see that in Texas. So Texas is still kind of a whole, putting a premium on high standards and accountability, and I think that's the fundamental difference.
I'm just going to pass it along. Go ahead.
So I think the fundamental difference is worldview and where we're getting our core values from. As a Christian, I believe God created us a little bit lower than angels in order to reign with Him in heaven forever. And I think Texas may still pay lip service to that kind of mindset of who we are and who we were created to honor. And LA, I would suggest, thinks we're all just a little bit more than apes, and that that's where we were all evolved from. And so it's not surprising that young people act like animals. And so if your fundamental worldview is we're all just a little bit smarter than apes, then you're going to treat humanity like a bunch of wild animals, and you're going to get those educational outcomes. And if you believe that we were all created in the image of God and that He loves us and He sent His Son to die for us so that we could reign in heaven with Him forever, and even non-Christians, who have religious beliefs also tend to hold those types of values, they're going to educate their children in a much different way. And so I think that's the fundamental difference why you see places like LA and Chicago and different worldviews have a major impact. So ideas have consequences, bad ideas have victims, and unfortunately Gen Z has been a victim of 200 years of bad ideas.
Do you have any thoughts, Dorian? All right, well, thank you guys so much. It's been a great panel. So.
Very good.
How do I get a hold of your
I think now we will transition to a lunch, if I'm not mistaken. I think it will be on the 10th floor, but everyone can go out into the hallway, and there will be a way to direct you around. So thank you, guys.